So I finally finished a book that I had asked for Christmas a couple years ago. It's called Lean Change Management by Jason Little. Now, I would say that overarchingly, I agreed with a lot of what was said, but it was also one of those books that didn't quite fit my scenario. So here's what I mean by that. One of the things that I really loved about the book was that it traced one company throughout the entire storyline. And I found that really helpful because you almost felt like you got to know people and the organization. So it made a lot more sense when he talked about what things did or didn't work. And I found that over the books that I've read, they're either in two camps. One is pure theory, and there's very little application. So I'm left wondering, would that work? And how would they actually roll that out? The other one I read is typically a type where here's 100 different scenarios and stories to prove a theoretical point. So it's helpful to see the examples, but it's also hard to gauge what else was going on that might have affected that. Along those same lines, I really appreciated that Little put together the different frameworks that he used and when he used them, when it was helpful. And I found that really interesting because I struggle with that sometimes, that there's elements of different frameworks that I really enjoy, but which ones are going to be best for that situation. So it was really helpful to see someone else talk through that. I also really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the change canvas. And actually that's when I first came across him, was a post from Idea Leap, I think, when he was talking about the change canvas and why they used it. And then I went and looked up their website and then saw that they had the book and asked for the book. So it was helpful to see those pieces put together into an actual example. And one of the things that I had been struggling with and why I tried it out was that I noticed as I was talking with people about what their vision was, what the success measures were, I would usually be met with silence. It's amazing to me how many times people don't even consider that before they start a project. And I was looking for a way to, I guess, add some more structure around that and show them where it fit into the process so that that would help guide the conversation. So I used it for the first time probably a few months ago with a client. And one of the things that worked really well was having an actual visual box. So we're still able to have an open conversation and I can move the pieces of what people are talking about into the appropriate places. So they can see it all happening and nothing is lost, but we don't get too far off track. One of the other things that I found, I guess, intriguing as I used it is that it still was, I guess, difficult to get people talking about what actually they were looking to achieve and how we were going to measure that. But as soon as I got into, I guess, the second half where I started talking about how are we going to support people, what are they going to need, it's like people came alive and they were very interested in that piece. And there was actually some pieces in that I could then use to go back to the vision and success measures conversation and say, okay, now that we see how we're going to support them, how do we match that up to the vision? So that helped that conversation go a little smoother. My main critique of the book would actually be something that's more to a personal fit. So I liked, again, that it was tracing one company throughout the process, but it was primarily talking about how to do something in an agile environment. And I, as an external consultant, am dealing mostly with clients who are traditional waterfall project-based, and I'm not going to be there for very long. I may be there 6 months to a year. So a lot of what he's talking about, like Kanban boards and agile methodology, isn't really applicable to my scenarios. So I had to spend a lot of time, I guess, finagling how would I make something like that work. They're not going to do lean coffee chats because I'm not there on site. So I think it would work much better for people who are change managers on an actual site somewhere where they can develop the relationships that they need for a lot of those types of things. So that for me was not quite as helpful. But if I were to ever move into a different scenario, I would probably pull this book back out and read through that again, looking for how I would apply it in this particular situation. Now, in regards to the lean change management cycle, they have a three-pronged process. You gather insights and then you develop the options that you have and then you run experiments. Now, I agree with the theory that we can't make change management a strict plan that will never change. Definitely would agree with that point. But in my particular situation, since I'm not in an agile environment, most of the people I'm dealing with would not be open to that concept. If I were to walk in and tell someone, hey, I want you to hire me, I don't exactly have a plan yet, we'll just kind of talk with people and figure things out. they would never buy my services. So how do we resolve that, and what could possibly be expanded or brought into the process that I am using? A large part of that is based on trust. Somebody who's internal can build that trust structure where I don't have that luxury when I'm walking into a new situation. So on the surface and to the clients, I have to tell them, here are the best practices. Here's what we recommend. Here is a structure that we're going to follow. And then underneath, I'm telling them that same kind of process that is the lean change cycle, which is, you know your people better than I do. Does this process make sense? Where do you think people are going to push back? So I'm getting that feedback from people, and that is one of the areas that I agree very strongly with Little on, is that feedback needs to be driving what you're doing. But it has to be something that I introduce slowly to people. Once they get to know that I have the structure under control, that we know what we're doing, and that we know the path forward. So I do agree with his core philosophy about getting the feedback. I really liked one place where he says, it's great to do some upfront planning, but a plan does not survive its first contact with the people that it's going to affect. And I would say I wholeheartedly agree with that. I see that all the time. I was really fortunate to have a manager when I first started in change management who said, you know what, we've got to get the feedback from the people on the ground, from the managers, from the executives, from other people who are involved. And that has really guided me throughout the process, and I've had to lean on that much more. So that wasn't a totally new concept to me, but I definitely agree that that is a very key ingredient, and that's something that you can apply to any kind of change management that you're doing. And there's two things that I pulled out that I want to try directly in my change management procedures from now on, even though I may not be in an agile environment. And the first one is that I can't do a poster on the wall to remind people of what we've talked about and get those conversations going. But what I can do in our project meetings is to bring up something more often visually, whether that be a list or we bring up the change canvas again. Okay, now here we are in the process. We're talking about this one in particular, or this is what we decided. Do we still agree on that? Does that still something that we think will work? So I'll bring that up more often because people do need those reminders. They forget a lot of times what we've already decided. The second thing that I want to try on my next engagement is the blast radius. I think that's a really good visual concept, and it's one that I have somewhat set up for people into quadrants of who we're going to keep happy, who do we just keep informed, etc. But I think it would work a little bit better to visually represent who all is going to be affected and how they interact and how far that effect is going to spread. Anything that I can do visually to help people understand what's going on makes connections for them a lot better. So I'm definitely going to be trying that one. So bottom line, I would say it's not the greatest fit for my particular scenario where it's heavy consulting, waterfall type organizations. But I did find a lot of the philosophy to be very true. I agree with a lot of it. And I think it was a really good read just to get a little more understanding about how some things came into being, where it works, why or why not. So I hope that you give it a read and let me know what you think. Or if you've already read it, tell me if you were able to incorporate some of the things into your planning and how it worked out. What would you use next time?